This happened a few months ago. I'm Jessica, 32, and I work night shifts at a busy city hospital. I've been a nurse for years, and usually I thrive in the urgency of emergency care. But on this first night of my recent shift, something felt off. Around midnight, I did my rounds, following the familiar rhythm of the hospital. As I walked past the nurse's station, the usual chatter faded. I noticed an empty patient room at the end of the hall. The fluorescent lights flickered above. It felt unsettling. I stepped closer, thinking it was just faulty wiring, but a chill crept up my spine. I pushed it aside and continued my work. The next shift, I returned to that room filled with curiosity. I thought I heard something, maybe a whisper? My heart raced as I crept closer, but the room was empty. Confusion clouded my mind. Was I just tired? I went about my job, but that nagging feeling persisted. Patients in other rooms started talking about strange dreams involving a woman in white. I shook it off, not quite ready to make any connections. As nights turned into weeks, I began to hear my name softly spoken. Jessica. I convinced myself it was nothing. One night, I walked down that hall again. The flickering lights became more intense. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow move. I froze. The air felt thick. Am I losing it? I searched for familiar faces, but the other nurses looked just as preoccupied. Then one night, a patient in room 304 began to talk about a woman in white following her. My chest tightened. I felt a knot in my stomach, but I tried to stay professional. I couldn't help but connect the dots. Something was definitely happening here. I stepped out of the room to gather my thoughts. That's when I heard it, the whisper again. Jessica. It felt more urgent this time. I jumped, my heart pounding. I turned to the empty room. What was going on? Then I heard it clearer. Help me. I rushed inside, but the room was still empty. The tension paralyzed me, like I weighed 1,000 pounds. I could feel my heart racing. What was I dealing with? Just as I turned to leave, I saw her, a reflection in the glass. I was sure of it. Panic surged through me as I backed away. I couldn't shake the image from my mind. I bolted out of the room. Running down the hall, I felt questions swirling. What had I just seen? Was I losing my grip on reality? I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, but I couldn't. My mind raced with what I'd experienced. Now each night I still wonder, was it real? What did that woman want? I couldn't shake the feeling that something dark lingered in that empty room. I still dread returning to work. Each shift I hear whispers in the dark. I can still see her reflection in my mind, and I can't stop thinking about it. The following night, I was back in the hospital, but dread weighed heavily on me. Each step down the hallway felt like a pilgrimage to my own fears.
I took a deep breath and headed toward the nurse's station, forcing myself into my usual routine. But the whispering presence lingered, tugging at the edges of my sanity. Around 2 a.m., I found myself in the break room, trying to steady my nerves. A couple of colleagues were chatting and sipping coffee, oblivious to my mounting unease. I tried to join their conversation, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Hey Jess, you okay? One of them asked, breaking through my fog. Yeah, just tired, I replied, forcing a smile. But a part of me knew it was more than that. I excused myself and headed back to my rounds. I planned to avoid room 401, but my feet betrayed me. I found myself standing in front of it again. The lights flickered, as if beckoning me inside. I hesitated. Just check the charts, Jessica, I whispered to myself. But curiosity pulled me closer, and before I knew it, I was peering through the glass. The room was dark. I thought I saw a figure sitting in the corner, but it couldn't be. Get a grip, I muttered, and turned to leave. That's when I heard a sound. Soft weeping. My heart dropped. Someone was in there. My first instinct was to kick the door open, but fear held me back. Instead, I knocked quietly. Hello? Is anyone in there?
I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. The weeping stopped suddenly, and the silence was deafening. It unnerved me. I glanced back down the corridor. Nobody was around, just me and the darkness. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. I jumped, almost letting out a scream. It was a message from Maria, another nurse. "You won't believe what happened in room 304 last night. Call me when you can." I quickly typed a response, asking what she meant, but my eyes drifted back to the door. Something compelled me to try the handle. To my surprise, it turned easily, and I pushed the door open. "Hello?" I called again, but no answer came. The room was completely empty. I stepped inside, searching every corner, but there was nothing, just shadows. A chill swept over me as I turned to leave. I felt a shift in the atmosphere, like the air itself was taut with something unseen. That's when a voice echoed in my mind. "Help me." I gasped, my heart pounding in my chest. It was the same voice I'd heard before. Was this punishment for my curiosity? I stumbled backward, almost tripping over a chair. I needed to get out, flee to where it was safe. But as I turned, the flickering lights dimmed to darkness, and everything went quiet. Just then, a whisper glided across the room, so close I could feel it brush my skin. "Jessica." Panic settled in, and I bolted out, slamming the door behind me. The corridor was a blur as I rushed back. I could barely catch my breath. What on earth was happening? By the time I reached the nurse's station, my pulse throbbed in my ears. I looked around for Maria, needing to discuss her message. Suddenly, I saw her standing at the end of the hall, eyes wide. "Jessica, you have to see this," she yelled. A sense of dread washed over me. What now? Just when I thought I couldn't handle more, it felt like the night was just beginning to unfold its mysteries. I hesitated for a moment, my instinct screaming to run in the opposite direction, but something in Maria's voice urged me forward. I crossed the floor, my heartbeat still racing from my earlier encounter. "What is it?" I managed to gasp. Maria looked around, her expression shifting between urgency and fear. "Follow me," she said, her voice low, as if afraid someone might overhear. I fell in step behind her, glancing back at the dim corridor with unease. We reached room 304, and she pushed the door open. I inhaled sharply, memories of my own experience flooding back. "You have to see this," she insisted, but I felt a chill run down my spine at the thought of going inside again. "What happened in here?" I asked, hesitating at the threshold. "The patient in here," Maria started, then fell silent. She stepped into the room, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I lingered in the doorway, the air thick with tension. "He was fine yesterday, just a routine check, but then—" I could see the bed was made, stark and untouched, with no sign of a patient. Maria pulled out a clipboard and pointed at the notes. "Look," she urged, her finger hovering over the date. "He went missing last night, right after you left. No one saw him leave, no traces at all." A sickening feeling settled in my stomach. Missing? How could that happen? I found myself stepping into the room, the shadows pressing closer. "That's not the craziest part," Maria continued, her voice trembling. She went in to check, and there was a strange note on the floor. She reached into her pocket and handed me a piece of crumpled paper. My fingers brushed against it, and I felt suddenly cold, nauseous. I unfolded the note, my palms shaking. The words were barely legible, written in hurried scrawls. "Help me. They're coming for me." "What does it mean?" I whispered, glancing around the room, half expecting something to jump out at me. Maria shivered. "I don't know, but Jess, you won't believe the weird part." She stepped closer, lowering her voice even more. "The patient wasn't just any patient. He was connected to room 401. My heart dropped. 401? But there's nobody in there. I know, "But I heard someone in there, weeping, last night," I confessed, a wave of unease washing over me again. "Maybe there's a connection. Maybe this was all planned somehow," she suggested, her eyes darting. "We need to find out." Just then, a loud crash echoed from down the hallway. Startled, we turned to see a light flickering dangerously. The air felt charged, buzzing with tension. My breath quickened as the realization hit me. We were not alone in this hospital. "Did you see that?" Maria gasped, her wide eyes reflecting fear. "Yes."
"What was that?" I shot back, every nerve in my body on alert. Something was definitely wrong, and I could feel it in my bones. I glanced towards room 401 down the hall, the door ominously closed. "We have to check it out," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But before I could even make a move, the lights went out, plunging us into darkness. Pitch black. Everything stopped. The silence screamed. What now? The sudden darkness was suffocating. I stood frozen, heart pounding against my ribcage. The heavy silence felt tangible, wrapping around me like a blanket. "What do we do?" Maria's voice trembled beside me. "I don't know," I admitted. Panic began to seep in as my mind raced. Every noise outside our small bubble felt amplified. The faint humming of machines, the occasional distant echo of footsteps, it all felt menacing in the dark. "We need to find a flashlight," I said, my voice quaking. I fumbled in my pockets, praying I wouldn't come out empty-handed. My hand brushed against my phone. I pulled it out and flicked the screen on, using the pale light to illuminate the room. "Okay, stay close." I took a step forward toward the door, still acutely aware of the tension in the air. The buzzing of the fluorescent lights had gone silent, leaving us alone with our fears. As I approached the door, I felt a chill, not from the cold, but from a growing sense of dread. Maria followed closely behind, whispering, "What if they're just messing with us?" "Who?" I whispered back, unwilling to voice the unthinkable fear that was creeping in. The thought that someone or something could be watching us made my skin prickle. We pushed the door open slowly, stepping into the hallway. The emergency lights flickered to life, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. It wasn't much, but it was better than utter darkness. A shadow moved in the distance. My breath caught. "Did you see that?" I pointed down the hall. "What?" Maria started, but fell silent, scanning the corridor. "There's someone or something," I said, adjusting my grip on my phone. The faint glow barely illuminated the space in front of us. I forced myself to take a few cautious steps forward, propelled by a mix of curiosity and fear. We have to figure out what's going on. As we crept closer to 401, the strange note from earlier flashed in my mind. "Help me. They're coming for me." My stomach tightened. The door to 401 was still closed. My heartbeat quickened as I raised my phone to shine light on the door. Everything felt heavy, weighed down by the secrets the walls held. I could hear muffled sounds coming from behind it now, a low, mournful sobbing that sent chills down my spine. "Jess, should we open it?" Maria asked, her voice barely above a whisper, trembling as she clutched my arm. "If someone's in there, we can't just leave," I replied, my voice steady despite the frantic beating of my heart. "We could help." I took a deep breath, pushed the door open, and the hinges creaked like a ghostly lament. The light pooled into the room, revealing empty beds and stark white walls, but the sound was undeniable. The weeping grew louder. "Hello?" I called out, my voice wavering. "Is anyone here?" Then everything went dead quiet. The sobbing stopped suddenly, and a heavy silence settled over the room. In that stillness, I froze, caught between fear and curiosity. That's when I saw it, a dark figure in the corner, shrouded in shadows. I strained my eyes, attempting to make sense of the outline.
"What is that?" Maria gasped, taking a step back, her voice trembling. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. All I could do was stare as the figure moved just slightly. And then it whispered, soft, almost pleading, "Help me." In that instant, I realized we were in way over our heads. The figure in the corner shifted again, making the shadows dance more violently. Something in its posture sent a wave of nausea through me. It was hunched, trembling slightly, as if caught between fear and desperation. "Jess?" Maria's voice was hardly a whisper now, laced with an unshakable terror. I could feel her retreating slightly, her grip on my arm loosening. "No, we have to—" I started, but the words fizzled out. My instinct screamed for me to run, but an overwhelming need to know what was happening kept me rooted to the floor. "Please," the voice came again, a rasp that clawed at my insides. "Help me." I swallowed hard, cautiously stepping farther into the room. "What's wrong? What happened?" My voice felt small against the vast emptiness. The figure straightened, revealing more of its form. It looked like a girl, maybe a teenager, with unkempt hair that clung to her face. Her eyes were wide, glistening in the dim light. She looked cold and terrified, but everything about her felt wrong. "What do you mean, help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Are you trapped?" I don't have much time." Her voice broke, and my heart sank deeper. "They're coming for me. You need to hurry." "Who's coming?" Maria broke in, panic seeping into her tone. The girl looked past me, eyes widening further. "You need to leave now. They'll hear you." Something prickled at the back of my neck. My instincts warned me that we were in grave danger. "Come with us," I blurted out, stepping closer to her. "No, you don't understand," she hissed, her voice rising with urgency. "If you stay, they'll take you too." And then, just like that, she recoiled into the shadows. My heartbeat thundered as I reached for her, but she was gone, as if she'd never been there. "Jess, what just happened?" Maria's eyes were wide, filled with unmistakable fear, but I had no answers for her. "Let's just get out of here," I said, my voice shaking. I turned to leave, but a sound outside the room caught my attention. Steady footsteps approached, steady and deliberate.
"Someone's coming," I whispered urgently. "Are they looking for us?" Maria whispered back, her face pale. I gestured for her to follow me as I backed towards the door, the light from my phone flickering now. "We need to hide," I breathed. Just then, a shadow crossed the threshold of the doorway. Someone was standing there, half illuminated by the emergency lights. My breath hitched in my throat, and I felt a wave of cold sweat drench my skin as I realized we were about to be trapped. "Stay down," I whispered to Maria, pushing us behind the doorframe, heart racing. An unexpected chill filled the room as it creaked open wider. In the dim light, I could see a figure just outside, silhouette shifting slightly. My mind raced. Could it be another victim, or something much worse? Before I could process, the figure stepped into the light of the emergency lamps. A familiar face surfaced, and I froze in shock, unable to breathe. It was someone I recognized. But what I saw on their face sent a chill down my spine. Whatever was happening, I knew we were only beginning to understand the darkness that lurked within the hospital walls. My heart hammered in my chest as I stared at the figure. It was Dr. Fields, my old mentor from medical school. His face was drawn and pale, eyes hollow, as if he had seen things no one should have to endure. "Jess," he croaked out, his voice weak and hoarse. "What are you doing here?" "We were just—" I struggled to find the words, my mind racing with the implications of his presence. We need to get out. There's— Not safe. You have to listen to me, he interrupted, eyes darting around nervously, as if he feared being overheard. The girl you saw, you shouldn't have talked to her. She's not what she seems. What do you mean? I demanded, stepping forward and lowering my voice. We heard her calling for help. She looked desperate. No, it's a trap, Dr. Fields said, urgency rising. She lures people in, and then they get taken. The ones who go after her, they never come back. My mind raced. Taken? By who? But Dr. Fields didn't answer. Instead, he took a step back, eyes wide, as if he sensed something I didn't. You need to trust me. We can't stay here. Just then I caught another sound, a soft, rhythmic tapping echoing from deeper within the hospital. My instincts screamed to flee, but something held me back. What's down there? I asked, pointing in the direction of the sound. He swallowed hard, color draining from his face. Only darkness. The rhythmic tap grew louder, and I felt a chill creep down my spine. It was a sound I couldn't quite place, like footsteps, but not quite, as if something was being dragged along the floor. We have to go now, Dr. Fields urged. He turned to lead us back the way he came, and I grabbed Maria's hand, forcing her to follow. But just as I took the first step, the emergency lights flickered violently before plunging us into near darkness. Fear gripped me as I stumbled, trying to keep my footing. I could barely see, but the sound, the dragging noise, it was closer now. The instinct to scream clawed at my throat, but I choked it down. Dr. Fields whispered urgently, "Stay quiet, they might still be here." For a moment I thought of the girl in the shadows and how she had seemed so real, but now I felt like we were being hunted, trapped in some nightmarish game that blurred the line between reality and illusion. As I pressed against the wall, the darkness felt like it was alive, crawling toward us. Then, just as I braced myself to run, something shifted in the shadows, and the sound ceased. I could barely hear my own heartbeat, but relief washed over me briefly until I turned, and that's when I saw it. A pair of eyes, glowing and fixed on us, hungry and waiting. "Run!" I screamed, adrenaline surging through me. We burst into motion, sprinting down the corridor, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were only beginning to uncover the truth buried deep within this hospital. It was a truth no one should ever know. We raced down the corridor, the sound of our footsteps echoing off the sterile walls. I kept glancing back, the fear of what lurked in the shadows tightening around my chest. Dr. Fields led the way, his pace frantic, but I could see he was just as terrified as I was. "Where do we go?" Maria shouted, her voice breaking through the panic. "Anywhere but here," Dr. Fields replied, his face flickering with fear and urgency. The flickering lights above us illuminated our escape, revealing the wreckage that lay strewn across the floor, broken equipment and remnants of past chaos. Our only path forward seemed to stretch endlessly, a maze of twisted hallways. I had no idea how we could have walked into this nightmare so blindly. As we turned a corner, Dr. Fields stumbled to a stop. "We need to find a way out through the stairwell." He pointed down a dark stairwell that seemed like it dropped into an abyss. The sound of the dragging continued to linger in my mind, mixing with the chaotic beat of my heart. Before I could object, he pushed through a door marked with a faded emergency sign, and Maria and I followed closely behind. The air was cooler, almost suffocating in its stillness. "No time to think," he whispered, clearly struggling to keep the panic from taking over. I took a breath, filled my lungs with the stale air, and began to follow him down the steps. Each thud of our feet bounced back, echoing like a warning. It felt wrong. Intensely wrong. The feeling that eyes were watching us from the shadows clawed at my instincts. As we descended deeper, I glanced up at Maria, who was quiet now, her eyes darting between Dr. Fields and the space around us.
"Jess," she murmured, barely above a whisper. "What is happening?"
Just stay close, I insisted, feeling my own confidence waver. We'll figure it out. But as we reached a landing, the air shifted. A flickering light lit up a figure at the far end of the corridor. A woman, her hair disheveled and wild, standing still in the dimness. "Help!" Her voice was weak and tremulous, like the girl from before, but something about her felt different. The air thickened with tension. "Don't," Dr. Fields warned, stepping in front of us. "It's a trick." I froze, my heart pounding in my throat, but the woman's eyes were hollow, just like his had been. "Please, help me," she repeated, her voice echoing off the walls, hypnotic yet unsettling. Then, without warning, she lunged forward, and a flash of movement caught my peripheral vision. Shadows twisted and contorted along the walls, merging with our fears. "Run!" Dr. Fields shouted again, his earlier composure shattered. We turned, feet pounding against the floor as we raced back up the stairs. Each step reverberated like a countdown. I felt the pull of something sinister behind us, an unseen force urging me to surrender to the shadows. We reached the first door off the stairwell, crashing through it, and finding ourselves in what looked like an old break room. The flickering lights were barely working, but they exposed forgotten relics of a life that had once bustled here. "Help me with this," Dr. Fields said, gesturing to the heavy table. Together, we shoved it against the door, trying to buy time. I glanced back at Maria, her face pale, uncertainty etched in her features. "What if it finds us?" "That's the least of our worries," Dr. Fields said, his voice low and urgent. "We need to hide." But deep down I knew, whatever had been lurking in the shadows had only just begun. The dragging sound hadn't disappeared. It was only waiting for its moment to pounce. Then everything went dark. The lights flickered out, plunging us into a murky void. The only thing I could hear was my own ragged breathing, the shadows closing in around us. I gulped as the darkness engulfed us. The chill in the air pressed against my skin. My eyes strained to make out shapes in the blackness, but I couldn't see anything beyond the outline of the table we had pushed against the door. I felt Maria bump against me, her breath shaky. "Jess?" she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "What do we do now?" "Stay quiet," I replied, my heart racing as I listened for any hint of sound, a footstep, a breath, or anything that suggested we weren't alone. The silence felt heavy, wrapping around us like a shroud. Then I heard the dragging sound again. It was closer this time, a low scraping that sent ice running down my spine. My thoughts raced as I tried to recall the layout of the hospital. There had to be another way out. "Dr. Fields," I said, barely able to keep my voice steady, "we can't just sit here." His voice was low, filled with tension. "I know. We need to find a way to the exit. I just can't see." Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, blinding us for a moment before settling into a dull glow. Dr. Fields stood just a few feet away, his eyes wide. The table remained braced against the door, but I could see scratches on the floor where something had tried to force its way in. "Did you see that?" Dr. Fields asked, still fixated on the door. "What see?" I asked, feeling unease clawing at my chest. He swallowed hard. Right before the lights went out, there was a shadow. A shiver ran down my spine. What kind of shadow? I don't know. His brows furrowed deeply, but it felt like it was reaching. I wanted to tell him he was imagining things, but something in my gut told me he wasn't. The dragging sound returned, stronger and more deliberate. "Jess!" Maria's voice shook as she clutched my arm. I could see the panic in her eyes. "We need to go, now." Dr. Fields nodded in agreement, and we began to move, slowly edging toward the door that led out of the break room. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just out of sight, waiting for us to make a mistake. "On 3, Dr. Fields said, glancing back at the door. 1, 2, 3. We pushed the table aside and flung the door open, ready to bolt, but there was nothing on the other side, only emptiness. The corridor stretched out before us, disorientingly quiet. "Where are we?" I breathed. "I think," Dr. Fields began, but he trailed off, eyes darting around. I spotted a grimy sign on the wall that pointed toward the main entrance. "This way," I shouted, taking the lead, but something tugged at my sleeve. I turned, expecting to see Maria, but it was the shadow again, creeping from the darkness, this time featuring a tangle of fingers reaching out to me. I stumbled back, fear coursing through me like a flood. "Get away!" I yelled, my heart racing as I instinctively moved forward. But then I heard the woman's voice again, echoing from somewhere above us. "Help!" But it sounded different, more urgent. "Jess, we have to move," Dr. Fields urged, his face pale, panic evident in his eyes. I took a deep breath, practical thoughts propelling me forward. We had to keep moving. Whatever was happening wasn't just confined to the shadows. I felt the air shift again, and I knew something was watching us. As we turned to flee, a shattering crash echoed from somewhere down the hall, causing us all to jump. It sounded like glass breaking. Something was coming. With a single horrifying realization, the whisper in my mind grew louder. We weren't just running from something. We were running towards something unknown. "Run!" I shouted, darting into the corridor with Dr. Fields and Maria close behind, desperate to escape the terror that lurked just out of view. We hurried down the corridor, our footsteps echoing against the sterile tiles.
The doors to various rooms loomed on either side, shadows pooling around their frames. Each door felt like a barrier hiding something impossible. "Keep moving," I urged, glancing back. Maria was right on my heels, her eyes wide with panic, while Dr. Fields kept pace, but his face held a mix of fear and determination. We rounded a corner and skidded to a halt as we reached the nurses' station. The desk was littered with scattered papers and a single flickering computer screen. I took a glimpse at Dr. Fields, then gestured toward the screen. "We could use that." He nodded and moved closer, his fingers dancing over the keyboard. But the computer was unresponsive. Panic gripped me as another crash echoed from behind us. It sounded closer this time, more violent. "Is it broken?" Maria asked, her voice quaking. Dr. Fields frowned but didn't reply. He continued to click keys, but nothing happened. I bit my lip, my thoughts racing. We had to find a way to communicate. Suddenly, I spotted a phone mounted on the wall, its red light blinking. "There," I pointed, relief rushing through me. "We should call for help." As I reached for the receiver, a voice crackled to life in the room. "Help!" It was weak and sounded broken, almost like a whisper of static. I froze, the sound tensing the air around us. "Is that coming from here?" Maria whispered, inching closer to me. I nodded, fear clawing up my spine. It wasn't just a voice. It felt like it was calling from somewhere deep within the walls. "We have to go, now," I said, suddenly overwhelmed by the weight of the unknown. We turned to leave the nurses' station when a loud bang jolted us. A door down the hall flew open, and our instincts kicked in. We dashed toward the emergency exit, my heart racing. As we rounded another corner, I glanced back over my shoulder and saw it. The shadow. It was crawling along the wall, its shape shifting and undulating like a dark liquid. A wave of terror washed over me. "Jess!" Dr. Fields shouted, his voice slicing through the air. "Run faster!" I didn't need to be told twice. We bolted toward the exit, but the shadows seemed to stretch, elongating into our path, blocking our way. I skidded to a stop, nearly colliding with the door. "What is that?" I gasped, horrified. "What do we do?" My brain buzzed with adrenaline and fear, but before I could respond, the shadow lunged, its claw-like fingers reaching for us. I instinctively grabbed Maria, pulling her back just as it brushed past my arm, its touch cold and clammy. "No!" I screamed, pushing the door open with all my strength.
We struggled through, tumbling down the stairs, my mind racing with dread. As we reached the bottom, I could hear the woman's voice again, louder this time. "Help!" It echoed, but it sounded different, more frantic. That's when I noticed the dark stain on the floor at the base of the stairs.
It wasn't just a shadow. It was something else entirely. Something was not right. Behind us, a crashing sound rang through the stairwell, and I looked back to see the shadow spilling through the door. Its dark tendrils reached for us as we stumbled out into the dimly lit hallway. I knew we had to keep moving, but whatever was lurking was hungry for more than just fear. It was after us, and now we were out of options. We burst into the corridor, panting and wide-eyed. The chill of the hospital seeped into my bones as I hesitated, glancing behind to see if the shadow had followed. It hadn't, but I knew it wouldn't be long before it found us again. "Which way?" Maria gasped, her face pale, panic washing over her with each passing second. Dr. Fields stood beside me, his features taut with urgency as he scanned the area. "There's an emergency exit at the end of this hall," he said, pointing down the corridor. "If we can just get there." But before he could finish, the air grew colder, the lights flickering erratically as if they were caught in a struggle against something beyond our comprehension. Each flicker deepened the sense of dread in my gut. I pressed my back against the wall, heart thumping like a war drum, desperation driving my every thought. "Let's go," I urged, steeling my nerves. We took off, moving as fast as we could without tripping over our own feet. Each echoing step brought us closer to that exit, but it also felt like a countdown, a timer leading us to an inevitable conclusion. Just as we reached the final stretch, a loud crash reverberated from behind us. I dared not look back, somehow sensing that whatever dark force pursued us could feel our fear. We were almost there. "Jessica, hurry!" Dr. Fields called out, his voice steady despite the chaos. We reached the end of the hall and spotted the exit door, steel and solid, a beacon of hope. I yanked the handle, ready to push my way through, but the handle wouldn't budge. "What's happening?" Maria shouted, panic bubbling over, her hands trembling as she tugged at the door. "It's stuck," I gasped, yanking with all my strength. The door wouldn't give. Behind us, I could hear the shadow drawing closer. The scuttling sound grew, the dragging noise gaining intensity. "Help! They're coming!" A familiar voice wafted through the air, echoing from the shadows. The girl, the one from the hospital room. My heart ached as I thought of her, lost in that void. "Dr. Fields!" I cried, but he was still pushing against the door, sweat beading on his forehead. I could feel the dread creeping in, an all-consuming fear gnawing at my sanity. In that moment, the door cracked open just enough for a sliver of light to escape. Without thinking, I pressed against it, forcing it open wider, and we poured through into the emergency exit corridor. "Go! Go!" I shouted, my heart racing as we ran. The lights dripped a sick yellow glow, casting shadows that danced as if alive. We raced down the stairs, the heavy breaths of my companions echoing in my ears. But just as we reached the bottom, time seemed to freeze. The air shifted, a heavy weight pressing against us. Something was coming. The sobbing echoed again, the girl's voice rising with urgency. "Help me!" it pleaded, tugging at the edges of my consciousness. I shook my head, terror surging through me. "No!" I screamed back, the sound tearing through my throat. "Stay away!" As we turned the corner, ready to push through the door that led to freedom, the shadow surged behind us, lunging forth with an insatiable hunger. Bursting through the exit door, I felt a rush of cold air hit my face, a taste of freedom so close. Just as we cleared the threshold, I glanced back to see the shadow erupt into the hallway, tendrils of darkness stretching towards us, engulfing everything in its path. We stumbled out into the open, gasping for breath as the night air hit us like a wave.
I turned to see the emergency exit door slamming shut, the sound muffled and strange. Then darkness fell behind us, like a curtain lowering on a dreadful scene. But the night wasn't over. I could still hear the echoes of that girl weaving through my mind like an unanswered question. "What just happened?" Maria whispered, her voice trembling. Dr. Fields shook his head, clearly shaken. I don't know," he said, running a hand over his face, the weight of the night pressing on him more than the terror that haunted us. The hospital loomed behind us, a shadowy monolith filled with whispers and darkness, alive in ways I could barely fathom. As we walked away, leaving behind the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that the dark didn't dissipate. It lingered, blurred lines and unanswered questions trailing behind us. Sometimes I think back on that night and wonder if it was real or part of some fever dream. The shadow still feels close, its whispers forever haunting the edges of my memory. I know one thing for sure: I will never return to that hospital.